etymology of the word quarantine, which of course comes in handy, right? Well, but before we go to the word itself, of course, you know what is the meaning of this word. Everybody is going through it. Let's talk a little bit about pronunciation. Remember, guys, little by little, I want to introduce some notions of phonetical transcript, because believe me, it can help us a lot. And there will be a video in the future, I will explain why. For now, just trust me, all right? If you don't, if you are kind of, reluctant to trust me, watch my etymology video on teacher, professor, and education, and you will realize that you have to obey me, all right? So, trust me on this one. It's important. Keep in mind, guys, that this little apostrophe here means that this one is the stressed syllable, like the strong syllable. Remember, in Portuguese we say gaveta. So the stressed syllable is the second one, the one in the middle. We don't say gaveta. If we did so, then the stressed syllable would be the first one. And if we said gaveta, then the last one would be the stressed one. Okay, so this one tells me this one is the stressed syllable. People, every time you have a W in phonetical transcript, it's W, okay? Like Walter, right? So it's W, right? But here, this C, if you have seen one of my previous videos, you'll realize this C, this inverse C is O, right? Like in Portuguese, bola. Bola would be like this. Bola, okay? Bola. That's not the point here. But we know that qua is the first syllable. So we have quarantine, okay? Just one more thing, the rest I will explain in the future. This E upside down, guys, is just the most important sound in English, just that, okay? There will be a video about this but it's sound, right? It's not right? It's so quarantine, okay? Quarantine. So, the etymology of quarantine. Guys, quarantine comes from Italian, right? I wrote here the expression which means 40 days. I don't know how to speak Italian, but I imagine that if you want to speak Italian, you just have to, use your hands a lot, maybe shake your body a little bit, speak louder, and then you speak Italian, right? So I imagine this should be pronounced something like 40 giorni, okay? Which means 40 days. And actually, guys, it started in, it was again, phonetical transcript here, the most important sound. So, v, ni, sh, shan. This is like the sound in shakara. It's not that I couldn't write an S here. It's a strange syllable, okay? Symbol. So, Venetian. So it was a Venetian policy of 1377. Yes, my 7 is different. I don't like to cut my 7s. I think it's annoying. Which established that ships that would like to stop and I don't know, people would enter the city, would have to wait for 40 days during times of plague, right? So that's 40 giorni, right? They would have to be 40 giorni inside the shed, waiting, until the plague died out. Okay. That would be the complete etymology for the word quarantine, right? But, so if you are just interested in that, you can, just stop the video, go do something else. But the number 40 is kind of interesting. I don't know, guys, if you are Christians, Protestants, Catholics, or if you don't have a religion, it doesn't matter, right? If you want to have a notion of our culture, you have to understand at least a little bit of the general stories of the Bible, It's not a matter of religion. Even if you are an atheist, it's impossible to read great pieces of art all around the world if you don't know a little bit of the Bible. Okay, so that's why from time to time I like to talk about the Bible, regardless your religion or lack of religion. Okay, people, I don't know if you remember or if you have ever heard the information. But before Jesus was crucified, he went to the desert. And he went to the desert to fast. By the way, fast is when you spend some time eating nothing, sometimes drinking nothing as well, for penitence or for other reasons. For example, if you have to bring or to collect some blood samples tomorrow for, let's say, a diabetes exam, you have to fast, during, I don't know, for 12 hours, okay? By the way, extra etymology here for free, pling, 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 pling. The word breakfast the idea is actually breakfast. Of course, we don't say breakfast, don't say that, okay guys, we say breakfast. But the idea is, in the morning, you break your fast. You were fasting during the night, and in the morning you break that, okay? So it's breakfast, okay? So Jesus went to the desert to fast during 40 days. In the end of those 40 days, he met the devil. The devil tried to convince him that he should abandon God, and it was a temptation period, okay? Let's keep that in mind. And let's go back in the Bible a little bit. I would like you to I don't know, try to remember. There was a period when Israel, okay, the Hebrews were in Egypt. And I can tell you guys that in the beginning, when they moved there, it was quite good, They were like the family of the second most powerful guy in Egypt. Maybe one day I'll tell you the whole story. But as time went on, I think 430 years, something like that, passed. By the end of that period, two things happened. Those original, I think like 40, 50, I don't know, guys that came to Egypt became more than 2 million people. And instead of being protected by, the powerful people in Egypt, they were slaves now. And then a guy appeared. Can you remember who was this guy? He was called by God to guide people out of Egypt. This guy was, that's it, Moses. And Moses was called by God. He went to the Pharaoh and said, look, we want to, we know we are your slaves, and, we provide most of the manual labor for the constructions of pyramid and all. We are 2 million people, but we would like to leave, please. And then Pharaoh looked at him and said, oh yeah, sure. Do you need something for the trip? Bye-bye. Not exactly like that, actually. Moses had to convince the Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, And he was very convincing. His arguments were very nice. There were many plagues to Egypt. And in the last plague, the firstborn child of every Egyptian died, And then people were finally free. We get to that scene where there is the sea. Moses has the staff that is like a big stick, in his hand. He hits the staff on the ocean, on the sea, and it opens and people walk through the ocean, through the sea, and then they are in the promised land, right? No way they were in the promised land. They had to walk the desert, until they could get to the promised land, because it's not like Egypt was here, the promised land was here, they were neighbors. It's not that. Guys, depending on the accounts, people are going to tell you that you could do that trip, from Egypt to the promised land. About, let's say, 2 months. 2 months, you would be able to do that, Do you have any idea, guys, how long it took Israel to travel from Egypt to the promised land? 40 days? No, 40 years, And so actually they even constructed a temple that it was a set of tents, they lived like entire generations in the desert until they could get to the promised land. Then you could ask yourself, okay, but why would they take 40 years to walk a distance that it would take, 2 months, right? And the answer is this: because they were disobedient. Because there were many occasions, again, the details are not important here, but while they were in the desert, they decided that God was not good enough for them because they were hungry sometimes, or because, they thought they would die. So they decided to start worshiping other gods, Worship is like when you say, oh, you're awesome, God. And God, of course, was not very happy with the idea, of having a competitor. And there was a moment God basically looked at them and said, look, I know I have promised I would guide my people, Israel, from Egypt to the promised land. And I cannot break my promise, because when I say something, I do it. Okay? So yes, my people will enter the promised land, but you will not. Meaning that all the adult females would perish like die in the desert, And I can tell you guys that after those 40 years, among all the adult 600,000 men. Remember I told you 2 million people, about 2 million people. That's an approximate account because the Bible just counts in terms of male adults. So we know that 600,000 male adults left Egypt, and then if we take into account that they had wives, they had many children, so we're talking about 2 million and a half people. Okay, but the point is, every male adult that had left Egypt died in the desert, with the exception of 2 guys, which are Caleb and Joshua. For other reasons in the future, I hope I'll have the chance. Ask in the commentaries below, guys, if you want to hear that specific part of the story. So they died in the desert. Not even Moses. Guys, Moses, the guy who opened the ocean. He went to Sinai mountain, and he got, the law directly from God. He was there 40 days again. He was there 40 days with God. When he came back to earth, his face was shining. So this Moses, he was not allowed to enter the promised land, And it's not because he got very old and then he had to die in the desert, God took him to the top of a hill or a mountain right in front of the promised land, and God told him, can you see it? And then Moses said, yes, I can. And God told him, that's all you're going to get from the promised land, because you're going to die here. And Moses died there in front of the promised land. He could never enter the promised land. And what is the idea? Why did God, wait until everybody was dead so they could enter the promised land? Because, and then I go back to Jesus in the desert fasting for 40 days, because in the Bible the number 40 has this meaning of purification. Okay? So the idea is, in order for the people to Israel to be purified, they had to wait for 40 years. So every man who entered the promised land would be, people who didn't see Egypt. I mean, except those 2 guys I told you about, right? The same thing with Jesus Christ. He was there for 40 days to purify himself. Of course, a side question would be, why would Jesus need to purify himself? I hope I can record that in another video. Please ask me in the comments if you want to hear about that. But there are other passages in the Bible. You know, the Bible is full of passages where people have to wait 40 days. There's something about the big flood. You know, Noah, the guy who built a big boat, let's call it this way, huge ship, put all the animals inside. You know, there was something about 40 days as well. If you want to hear more, please ask in the comment. So because of this idea of purification, you know, the Venetians would think 40 days in the ship would be a nice period to wait until the virus died out, all right? So 40 giorni is enough for the virus to die out. Of course, nowadays, guys, the word quarantine doesn't refer specifically for 40 days, you know, I don't know, it can be 5 years, think about it.